I humiliated and fired the lowly and quiet janitor without knowing that she owned the entire global corporation and that I was working at one of her companies. I forced her to kneel on the cold marble floor of my office lobby. I poured hot coffee on her uniform and made her clean it with her own clothes. And on the day she accidentally spilled mop water on my shoes, I looked her dead in the eyes and told her to get down and lick my shoes clean. I said those words out loud. I meant every single one of them. I was the manager of one of the most powerful corporations in the city, and she was just the janitor. That is what I believed. That is what I told myself every single morning when I walked past her without so much as a glance. And I was wrong. Catastrophically, irreversibly, humiliatingly wrong. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you, and do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now let us get into this story because I promise you, by the time we reach the end, your jaw will be on the floor. My name is Derek Calloway, and at 38 years old I had worked my entire adult life to become the regional manager of Harman Global Enterprises, one of the most prestigious multinational corporations operating across 4 continents with satellite offices in over 20 cities. I wore custom suits. I drove a car that cost more than most people's annual salaries. I had a corner office on the 14th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that gave me a view of the entire downtown skyline, and every single morning I walked into that building feeling like I owned the place. That is the irony that still keeps me awake at night. I felt like I owned the place. But I did not own a single brick of it. The company had a mysterious owner. Everyone in the building knew that. Everyone in every branch of Harman Global Enterprises knew it. Nobody had ever met the real owner in person. Not the senior executives, not the board members at the quarterly meetings, not even the regional directors who had worked there for decades. All we knew was that the company was extraordinarily profitable, that its decisions were sharp and precise, and that someone somewhere was pulling the strings with an intelligence that none of us could fully trace or explain. The public face of the company, the man who represented ownership at press conferences and handled operations across branches, was a tall composed man named Mr. Vincent Crawford. He was sharp, well-dressed, and commanded every room he entered. But even Vincent was not the real owner. He was the representative, the face, the voice. The actual owner remained completely invisible to all of us. And that invisibility, I would later learn, was entirely by design. She started working at our branch on a Tuesday morning in early autumn. I remember because I arrived late that day and nearly slipped on the freshly mopped floor near the elevator bank, and when I looked down to see what had almost embarrassed me in front of my subordinates, I saw her. A small, slender woman, maybe early 40s, dressed in the standard gray and blue janitorial uniform that the cleaning staff wore. She had quiet eyes, the kind that never really looked directly at you, always slightly downward, always careful, always still. Her name tag said Margaret. Just Margaret. No last name on the tag. She was unremarkable in every way that I had trained myself to measure people. She did not speak much. She did not greet loudly or try to make conversation with anyone. She simply moved through the building like a shadow, pushing her cart, mopping floors, emptying trash bins, scrubbing the glass doors at the entrance until they gleamed. She was extraordinarily good at her job, I will give her that, though at the time I would never have said those words out loud. The first time I truly noticed her was about a week after she started, when I was walking out of a client meeting with 3 senior partners and she was mopping the corridor outside the conference room. I clicked my fingers at her the way you might signal a waiter and told her she had missed a spot near the baseboard. I did not say please. I did not say thank you when she immediately moved to correct it. I kept walking and continued my conversation as if she were a piece of furniture. And that, right there, was the beginning of everything. Within a few weeks, it had become almost routine. I am not proud of this. I am telling you this because every word of it is true and because I need you to understand how deeply I had convinced myself that the way I treated her was acceptable, was normal, was even justified. I had built a persona around authority. I confused cruelty with leadership. And Margaret became the person on whom I exercised that cruelty most freely, because she never fought back. She never raised her voice. She never reported me. She just quietly took it and kept working. I once walked into my office and found that my morning coffee had been left on the edge of my desk by my assistant. I was in a terrible mood that day, a deal had fallen through the previous evening, and when I rounded the corner and saw Margaret near the hallway wiping down the wall panels, something dark rose inside me and I carried that cup of coffee down the corridor and I poured it directly onto her uniform. Right there, in front of 3 other employees who were standing nearby. I told her she needed to learn how to watch where she was standing. She had not been anywhere near me. She had done nothing. But I said it with such authority that nobody in that hallway dared to say a word. And Margaret simply reached into her cart and began patting her uniform with a dry cloth. Her hands were steady. Her face did not change. She said nothing. That silence should have unsettled me. Instead, I took it as submission, and submission, to a man like I was then, felt like power. There were other employees who followed my lead. That is the ugly truth about a toxic workplace. When the person at the top behaves a certain way, it trickles down. Some of my subordinates began making comments when they passed her in the halls. Remarks about her appearance, about the smell of the cleaning chemicals she used, about how she should try smiling more. One of the junior executives, a young man named Tyler who was desperate to impress me, once pretended to gag when she walked past his desk. People laughed. I said nothing to stop it. My silence was its own kind of participation. But the worst of it, the moment that I now look back on with genuine nausea, happened on a Thursday afternoon about 6 weeks into her time with us. I was walking through the main lobby on my way to a luncheon with a group of investors, dressed impeccably, shoes polished, everything perfect. Margaret was mopping the lobby floor and she had placed a small yellow caution sign near the wet area, which I ignored because I was on the phone and moving fast. She did not see me coming from the side corridor. I did not see her stepping back to wring out the mop. We collided. The bucket tilted. And dirty mop water splashed directly across my shoes and the lower hem of my trousers. I stopped. I looked down. I looked at her. And something inside me that I cannot explain and cannot excuse took complete control of my mouth. I told her to get down on her knees and clean my shoes. She looked at me. Just once, directly, those quiet eyes meeting mine for one of the rare moments she ever held my gaze. Then she knelt. And I said it again, slowly, because I wanted everyone in that lobby to hear me. I told her she was going to lick the water off my shoes. Right there. On the marble floor of the lobby. With at least a dozen employees watching from various angles. She did not do it. She took a cloth from her apron pocket and began wiping the shoe instead, and I let it go because the investors were waiting. But I made sure she knew she was worthless that day. I said those exact words. I told her she was not even worth being a janitor in a company of this level. That she should have stayed wherever it was that people like her came from. She said nothing. She stood up when I walked away, picked up her mop, and continued cleaning. Not everyone in that building was like me. I want to be honest about that. There were a handful of employees who were visibly uncomfortable with the way Margaret was treated. They would give her small nods in the hallway, occasionally hold a door open for her, acknowledge her presence in ways that most of us did not bother to. But only one person ever said anything out loud, and that person was a woman named Cassandra Wells, one of our mid-level project coordinators in the operations department. Cassandra was bright and principled in the way that made certain managers nervous around her. She did her job exceptionally well, but she never laughed at the right jokes and she never pretended that things were fine when they were not. On the day that Tyler performed his little gagging act near Margaret's cart, Cassandra stood up from her desk across the open floor and said, clearly and without any shake in her voice, that what Tyler had just done was disgusting and that Margaret deserved the same basic respect that every other human being in that building received. The room went very quiet. I looked at Cassandra from across the floor. She looked right back at me. And I fired her before the end of that afternoon. I called it a performance issue. I signed the paperwork myself. Cassandra cleaned out her desk, said goodbye to the few colleagues who were brave enough to walk her out, and left the building. Margaret watched her go from near the service corridor. I saw her watching. I did not care. Everything shifted on the Friday that Margaret brought her son to work. It was a school holiday and it was not an uncommon thing for hourly workers to occasionally bring children into the building in non-peak hours if they had no alternative childcare. The boy was 8 years old, small and bright-eyed, wearing a blue jacket and carrying a little backpack. Margaret settled him in the small waiting area near the service entrance, the area used by maintenance and delivery staff, and gave him what I assume were very clear instructions to stay exactly where she had placed him. She handed him what looked like a coloring book and a small snack and went off to begin her shift on the upper floors. I do not know how long it took before the boy wandered. Children that age do not understand the geometry of adult rules. He probably got curious, probably just wanted to look around, probably saw the big open lobby with its glass walls and polished floors and thought it was the most amazing place he had ever seen. And so he explored. And he came around the corner at precisely the wrong moment and ran directly into me as I was striding toward the elevator with my phone in one hand and a folder in the other. The folder hit the floor. Papers scattered. My phone skidded across the marble. And the boy looked up at me with wide terrified eyes and said he was sorry in the smallest voice I had ever heard. I did not see a frightened 8-year-old child. I did not see an innocent mistake. I saw a disruption. I saw contamination of my space. And I turned and I found Margaret because someone had gone to get her the moment the collision happened, and I said things to that woman in front of her child that I cannot fully bring myself to repeat even now. I called her names. I said that she was irresponsible, that she was the kind of woman who could not secure a real job, that whatever life choices she had made had clearly not worked out for her and that it showed in every aspect of her existence, including the fact that she was dragging a child into a workplace where neither of them belonged. I said she had no class. I said she had no future. I said it all loudly, deliberately, in front of that little boy in the blue jacket. Margaret stepped in front of her son. She did not yell. She did not cry. She simply stepped between me and the boy and looked at me with an expression I did not understand at the time. Not anger exactly. Not hurt exactly. Something closer to clarity, like someone watching a thing unfold exactly as they had expected it would. She apologized on behalf of the boy in a voice that was perfectly even, reached down, took his hand, walked him back to the service entrance, and then returned to her cart and resumed her shift. Her boy sat quietly for the rest of the day. I did not think about either of them again until everything fell apart. It was a Wednesday, gray-skied and cold, about a week after the incident with Margaret's son, when a black car pulled up to the front of the building in the mid-morning and Vincent Crawford stepped out. Vincent Crawford, the face of Harmon Global Enterprises, the man who represented the invisible ownership at every public function and board-level meeting. He made unannounced visits to the various branches sometimes. They were called routine operational checks and nobody liked them because Vincent had eyes like a scanner and a memory like a court transcript. If something in your branch was not right, Vincent found it. He came through the front entrance and spent the first 20 minutes in a quiet review of the operations floor, speaking with a few senior staff, reviewing some logistical paperwork with the assistant director. I was watching from the periphery, confident because my numbers were strong and my client portfolio was impressive. I had nothing to hide, or so I believed. And then he stepped into the main lobby on his way toward the executive corridor, and that is where he saw it. I had come down to the lobby at that same moment because I was meeting a client in the ground floor conference room, and I had seen Margaret crouched near the far end of the lobby, scrubbing a stubborn scuff mark off the base of one of the decorative columns. And old habits are vicious things. Without even fully deciding to, I stopped, looked at her, and told her loudly that she had been on that same spot for too long, that she was useless, that even the cleaning she was supposedly trained to do she could not do properly, that maybe it was time we found someone who actually knew how to hold a mop. And I added, because something mean in me always needed the final word, that she was an embarrassment to herself and to everyone who had to look at her. I did not know that Vincent Crawford was standing 12 feet behind me. I heard his voice before I turned around. Low, controlled, and carrying the kind of authority that does not need volume to land with full weight. He said my name once, Derek, and the way he said it made every person in that lobby stop moving. I turned around. Vincent was standing with his hands at his sides, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on me with an expression I had never seen on his face in all the years I had interacted with him. I did what I always did when I needed to seem in control. I straightened up and told him not to worry about it, that the woman was just the janitor and that I was simply managing performance on the floor as I always did. I told him she had a habit of being slow and careless and that strong management required direct feedback. I used all my polished corporate language and I delivered it with full confidence. Vincent crossed the lobby floor in 6 steps and slapped me across the face. Not hard enough to knock me sideways. Hard enough to stop every sound in that building. A slap that landed in the silence like a thunderclap. I stood there with my hand raised toward my cheek, completely unable to process what had just happened. And I said, my voice cracking in a way I hated, I asked him why he would do that, that she was just a janitor, just a worthless and lonely janitor, and she was not worth his concern. And Vincent looked at me with an expression that I now recognize as a combination of fury and pity, and he said 4 words that rearranged every single thing I thought I understood about my life. He said, "Do you know who this is?" And then he said it. He said her name. Her full name. Not just Margaret. Her full name. And then he told me, told every person standing in that lobby with their breath held and their eyes wide, that the woman I had been pouring coffee on and ordering to the floor and screaming at in front of her child and telling was not even worth being a janitor, was the owner of Harmon Global Enterprises. Not a shareholder. Not a board member. The owner. The founder. The woman whose signature was on the original incorporation documents. The woman whose vision had built the company from a single investment into a global operation spanning 4 continents and 20 cities. The woman whose name was on the trust that owned the building we were all standing inside. I heard someone behind me drop something. I heard someone else pull in a sharp breath. I heard complete, absolute, ringing silence where an entire lobby full of people had been making noise just minutes before. I turned to look at her. At Margaret. At the woman in the gray and blue uniform, still holding the cloth she had been using to scrub the column. And for the first time in all the weeks I had known her, she raised her face fully, squarely, with complete and total composure, and she looked directly at me. And in that moment I understood the expression I had never been able to read on her face. It was not patience. It was not submission. It was observation. She had been watching me, all of us, from the very beginning. Every insult. Every cruelty. Every moment where I had performed my authority at her expense. She had seen all of it with perfect clarity, and she had let it happen because she needed to know, for certain, exactly what kind of man was running her company. Vincent was still speaking, his voice rising, telling me about the months of anonymous inspections, the fact that the owner of Harmon Global made a practice of moving through her own companies in disguise periodically, not to spy but to see the truth of how people behaved when they believed no one of consequence was watching. He was saying that the branch I managed had been flagged for a cultural review and that today was supposed to be a standard assessment. But he had seen enough in the last 3 minutes to complete the assessment entirely. But then Margaret spoke, and the moment she opened her mouth, the entire lobby went even quieter than it already was, which I had not thought was possible. She told Vincent to stop. Gently, without any drama. She told him she would handle it from here. And then she turned to face the room, and she spoke with a calm authority that made every single corporate performance I had ever delivered feel like amateur theater. She told the staff assembled in that lobby, the ones who had insulted Margaret, the ones who had laughed at Tyler's cruelty, the ones who had stood in hallways and said nothing, that she was the owner of this company and of 11 others like it across the country. She told them that she had spent time in this branch specifically because the reports she had received through internal channels had raised concerns about the leadership culture. She said that what she had witnessed firsthand had exceeded even her most pessimistic expectations. She said it without raising her voice. She said it while still holding the cleaning cloth in her hand. She turned to me last. She looked at me for a long moment and then she said that she was terminating my employment effective immediately, that I would receive the legally required notice documentation and that my access credentials would be deactivated before I reached the parking structure. She said it the way you might read an item off a list. Clean. Final. Irrevocable. My knees hit the floor before I made the decision to kneel. I do not fully know how it happened. One moment I was standing and the next I was on the cold marble that Margaret had polished every single day for weeks, and I was crying in a way I had not cried since I was a child, and I was saying I was sorry in a voice I did not recognize as my own. I was begging. Openly, completely, with no dignity remaining, in front of every person in that building. I said I did not know. I said I was wrong. I said please. Margaret looked at me on the floor for a moment. And then she looked away. She issued one directive before she walked out of that lobby. One command that she delivered to Vincent while the room was still processing everything it had just witnessed. She told him that effective immediately, Cassandra Wells was to be reinstated and placed in the position of branch manager. That her salary was to reflect the new role from the date she had been wrongfully terminated. And that a formal review of every employee in the building who had participated in or witnessed the harassment of any member of the cleaning staff was to be initiated within 48 hours. And then she picked up her cleaning cart and she walked it calmly to the service corridor, the same corridor she had walked through every single day for months, and she disappeared around the corner. And the lobby, the grand gleaming lobby of Harmon Global Enterprises, was completely silent. Cassandra Wells came back to the building 3 days later. She came back as the branch manager. I heard she walked in wearing the same calm expression she had on the day she was fired, said good morning to Margaret on her way through the entrance, and got to work. I was not there to see it. I had been escorted out the same afternoon the truth was revealed and I have not been back since. I have had months now to sit with what I did. And I want to tell you something that I did not expect. The hardest part is not losing the job. The hardest part is knowing that every time I chose to humiliate that woman, every cup of coffee I poured on her uniform, every command I gave in that lobby, every cruel word I said in front of her child, she already knew exactly who she was. She never needed my validation or my respect to know her own worth. She was always the most powerful person in that building. I just could not see it because I was too busy performing power I had never actually earned. She saw me clearly from the very beginning. And I never saw her at all. That is the thing about people you dismiss. Sometimes they are the only ones in the room who actually know what is going on. And by the time you figure that out, it is already far too late. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to be reminded today that every single person deserves dignity, regardless of what they are wearing or what job they are doing. We will see you in the next one.